Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about WWF Raw on the SNES. WWF Raw actually has quite a bit going for it. It has a bunch of game modes. It seems pretty good at first glance. The graphics are nice. But then you remember it's an LJN published game, and there's gonna be some crap once you get into it. Of the games that I've played so far, WWF Raw has the most in it, like the most content and the most of pretty much everything that you would expect from a wrestling game. The problem is the controls are shit. So here's a quick list of the game modes. There's no central gimmick match for this game, so you've got quite a bit in it. You've got just a simple one-on-one match, you have tag team matches, you have a Survivor Series match, which is a 3-on-3 elimination match, which is pretty cool. Then you've got the Royal Rumble, then you have a Bedlam match, and then you've got the Endurance match. The Bedlam match is an oddly named one because it's just a tornado tag match with no disqualification, and that's okay. It feels a little bit like a hardcore match, but it's done kind of stupidly. All you have to do is knock your opponents out. The problem is the controls are terrible, so knocking your opponent out is pretty difficult. Some of these matches also have sub-menus in them, so you can do like a single-player tag team match or a two-player tag team match, that sort of thing. It's just to add more players, and you can also adjust the difficulty as well. The difficulty is confusing to me. Instead of just having an easy, normal, and hard mode, they have you pick between 1 and 10. I can only assume that 1 is the easiest and 10 is the hardest, but it's not really that intuitive. It's honestly kind of stupid, but at the same time, I like that they gave you that much granularity with it, so yeah. It's kind of a double-edged sword. A stupid double-edged sword, but a double-edged sword nonetheless. The controls are really what holds this entire game back. It's got this weird tug-of-war grapple system in it, where you lock up with your opponent and then you just mash one of the face buttons, either A, B, X, or Y, and hopefully you win and then perform a wrestling move. The biggest problem is everybody seems to have the same moveset, so there's not a whole lot of difference between the wrestlers aside from their looks, and you can occasionally do either like a super move or a finishing move or something like that. I was never able to actually do it because I just sucked at this game. Even when I dialed the difficulty down, it was still kind of ridiculous, and I honestly was not having a good time with this game at all. I don't want to rule out operator error in the control scheme, but yeah, it was not good. And for a game that looks as impressive as this one does, I would have expected a control scheme that, made a little bit of sense. At times, it sort of felt like things were a little unresponsive. Like I would throw a punch, but it wouldn't come out until the opponent had moved out of the way, or I would pass through my opponent. It was just an extremely frustrating game to play, and it made me want to go back and play anything other than this. Overall, I think when you take into account the number of game modes with this, and how good the roster actually is, I think that makes the gameplay at least okay, but the control scheme takes a lot of getting used to, and it's just not worth it. It is better than the WCW game, but I would rather be playing Hammerlock Wrestling than having to go through more of whatever the hell this was supposed to be. WWF Raw and the other LJN-published WWF games use digitized graphics, so the characters are going to look pretty close to their real-life counterparts, especially when you look at the character select screen and you have digitized photographs of everyone. Unfortunately, the character models don't really make a whole lot of sense, and I know I've mentioned this with the WCW game as well, but yeah, the developers look like they just used one character model and made graphical changes to it. This is going to be a running pattern for all of the LJN published games, and I'm a little worried that it's going to be that way for other wrestling games later on as well. This does create some kind of interesting situations where you have Yokozuna, who is supposed to be like 500 pounds in this game, and he looks smaller than the 1-2-3 Kid, who's supposed to be like, I want to say around like 200 pounds in this, but I could be a little off. It's really ridiculous when you look at it, and it just doesn't make any sense. Or you have Luna Vachon, who's just incredibly jacked in this game from a character model standpoint, and she's the same size or bigger than some of the male wrestlers. It's rather strange, and it's kind of hilarious, which makes it at least worth checking this game out a little bit to see how crazy the character models look. After you get past the weirdness of the character models, everything else looks really good. This is one of the more visually impressive wrestling games that I've played, and it's what you would expect from the Super Nintendo at this time. Overall, the graphics are really good. The sprites are big, they're detailed, the photos of the wrestlers are great, the game's presentation is excellent. The only negative thing I really have are that the character models look ridiculous at times. So let's talk a little bit about the roster here. It is really good, but there is one entry that's kind of odd. So you have Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Yokozuna, Bam Bam Bigelow, Razor Ramon, Lex Luger, Doink, Shawn Michaels, the 1-2-3 Kid, Diesel, Owen Hart, and Luna Vachon. I have no idea why Luna Vachon is in this game. It just feels very odd that she's here. She's the only female wrestler that I've seen in, I think, all of the games that I've played so far. So her entry in this one is very strange to me. I was assuming that this game based its roster off of either the 93 or the 94 WWF roster, which made it a little weird. There were a lot of other wrestlers that probably could have been included on this instead of Luna Vachon, but, I'm guessing that the Clique, which was Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Razor Ramon, and the 1-2-3 Kid, probably did a little bit of jockeying to get some people excluded from this. That's just my assumption, because there were a few other wrestlers I would have liked to see on here instead of, Luna Vachon. Again, nothing against her, it just seems really weird that she's here. This game really had the most going for it out of all the wrestling games that I've played so far. It looks amazing for the Super Nintendo. However, the gameplay is average at best. It takes a lot of time to adjust to the control scheme, and there's just a lot of issues with that control scheme. I would have expected them to do something closer to how WCW Super Brawl did theirs, where the moves all could be performed pretty easily, but they still use the same basic moveset. With this one, that incredibly dumb tug-of-war thing that they decided to go with is really awful. It should not have been in this game at all. They really should have gone with something where you lock up, press a directional button, and either A, B, X, or Y. That would have been so much better, and it would have been way more intuitive than just mashing one of the buttons and potentially killing your thumb from just trying to do like a headbutt out of a grapple position. That being said, there are a ton of game modes in this, and it feels like I had played this game before I reviewed it, but I could have been thinking about one of the other LJN games. Because I remember hanging out with my friends before one pay-per-view and playing some WWF game on the Super Nintendo, but I'm not entirely sure which one. I just know it wasn't the arcade game. So let's wrap this one up. I think it has great graphics, a great roster of wrestlers, and there are just a ton of things to do in this game. However, the controls are really bad, and there's a very steep learning curve in this, and it's just not really worth going back to revisiting. WWF Raw is one of the better looking wrestling games that I've played, and it has similar issues to other games that LJN has published, where its control scheme is just stupid and terrible. I know there is a developer, but it just feels like LJN was always putting out games that were at best average and at worst barely playable. I guess that would put this one at the higher end of the LJN spectrum, but that's not really saying a whole lot. The gameplay really was my biggest issue with this. The lockup system felt random at best, and even once I figured out how to do it, it just never really felt like there was a good payoff for it. It also felt like the game would just randomly decided what would happen, like whatever move you were going to do, and yeah, I just didn't like it at all. This is a great example of good graphics not translating into a good game. I think it is better than WCW Super Brawl, but it isn't as good as Hammerlock Wrestling. So that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.